Well, well, well. The Mets have flagged the same issue with Carlos Correa's right leg that gave the Giants pause, and as of now, Carlos Correa is still not officially signed, and there is a possibility that he could end up back with the Giants. So we'll get into what the heck is going on and what the resolution is likely to be next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspic, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, the latest on Carlos Correa. The last time we spoke, because it was Christmas weekend, we talked about the deals for Michael Conforto and Taylor Rogers that the Giants made late last week, pending physicals. Those deals are still not official as well, but we were under the assumption that this Carlos Correa deal was going to go through, even though it was pending a physical, because we believed that the Mets owner, Steve Cohen, was kind of enough of a risk taker, and he had to know that whatever the Giants flagged during their physical, what did he think was going to happen? He must have thought it really wasn't as legitimate as it has turned out to be, because what's happened is Carlos Correa had his physical with the Mets on Thursday. This is day 5 now. We're almost 5 full days outside of when he took this physical, and it was reported that the expectation was that the deal would become official before Christmas. But then reports, I think, on Saturday morning were that the Mets had flagged the same issue with Carlos Correa's physical as what the Giants had found, a lower right leg issue. And we don't have too many details about exactly what it is that these teams are finding and how exactly it affects their projections of the player moving forward. And without that knowledge, we really can't say what a fair offer would be at this point. We can't even say, are the Giants even interested at this point? But what we do know is that the Giants are largely, maybe not completely, but largely off the hook for the way things went down a week ago today. The timeline for the Giants was as follows. They had their physical with him on Monday, and then on Tuesday, there was a scheduled press conference. You can make the case, and I do make the case, that was a mistake. Although we don't know, maybe Correa and Scott Boras, his agent, wanted it that way. Maybe there was a belief that would perhaps have the team look over or feel more pressure to look past whatever it is that they ended up finding. Because if Boras and Correa didn't know about this issue, that's kind of a bad job by them. They should know what's going on with his health before these physicals. And anyway, so the timeline, Giants did their physical on Monday, and then on Tuesday at 11 a.m. was supposed to be the press conference to introduce Correa. At 8:15 a.m., the Giants sent out an email to the press saying today's Giants press conference has been postponed. And reportedly, Scott Boras himself said basically that Farhan Zaidi called him and said they needed more time. And then Boras said, how much time do you need? Give me a deadline. And the Giants said 1 p.m., so only 2 hours after the scheduled press conference. And Boras has said, even though some seem to believe, based on something else that Boras said, that the Giants then essentially ghosted Carlos Correa after saying we need to postpone the press conference. A lot of people believe that the Giants just didn't say anything else to Scott Boras about Correa the rest of the day, and then by the end of the day, he had to deal with the Mets. But take Scott Boras' own words for it. That is not what happened. Scott Boras said the following. He said, how much time do you need? They set a time. They told me that they needed 1 o'clock. They would let us know. Then we received notice from them that they wanted to continue to talk and that they needed more time. But at that point in time, I told them I had to have a decision whether they were going to honor their letter of agreement that we had reached. They said that at that point in time, they needed more information. They needed more discussion. They wanted to continue to talk. But at this time, they couldn't go forward. And I advised them that I had to pursue alternative measures on behalf of Carlos with other teams. End quote. And so essentially, the Giants were given 1 day, about maybe even less. They were given, who knows when the physical was taken on Monday, but they were essentially given until 1 p.m. the following day to make a call on the original agreement, which was 13 years, $350 million. And if the Giants would not honor the agreement, which was pending a physical, they would essentially say the physical failed and we will not honor the 13-year, $350 million agreement that was pending a physical. And if they choose to not honor that, effectively Carlos Correa is a free agent again. And this is what Boras is saying. He at that point he needed to engage with other teams. And the deadline passed and the Giants said we are not going to honor 13,350, and then Correa was effectively a free agent again. We don't know, although we have heard that maybe the Giants didn't communicate any more for the rest of the day, but that could be A, not true, B, it could be that the Giants really felt like what they found, they could just essentially not be interested in the player anymore based on what they found. So then 12 hours later or so, Correa reportedly has a deal with the Mets that is also pending a physical. And so this is where things get really weird because, as I kind of alluded to earlier, what did Steve Cohen, the Mets owner, really think was going on? What did Scott Boras tell him? Scott Boras reportedly has been saying that, not reportedly, he's been saying that the Giants didn't tell him the issue that they found. And Scott Boras's claim was that the player, Correa, was completely healthy and that this is all conjecture and physicians using their crystal ball to look into the future. So I don't know what Steve Cohen probably thought the Giants found something, but that he would be able to look past it. But fast forward to their physical on Thursday, they seemingly expected it to be acceptable to them, but it was not. We have had multiple reports stating that the Mets flagged the same issue, and it has to do with Correa's lower right leg, where he has had a surgery, a broken bone, ligament damage, and a plate that's been put into the lower right leg. And so at this point in time, what happens now? It's the same thing exactly as what happened with the Giants. Scott Boras is going to say to them, and this is very likely already happened, that you need to either honor the letter of agreement, which is with the Mets, 12 years, $315 million, or he needs to talk to other teams. And we've had reports coming out over the last few days that other teams have been in contact with Scott Boras about Correa. And so this is very likely already happened, exactly what happened with the Giants. Keep in mind that on last Tuesday, after the Giants postponed their press conference, we didn't hear anything about communication with other teams, that other teams were engaged on Correa and making offers. We only heard when it was done that the Mets and Correa had an agreement. And so the fact that this is now the 5th day after the physical tells me that the Mets have said we're not going to honor the letter of agreement for 12 years, $315 million. And if they're saying that, Correa would be released into free agency, free to talk to other teams, just as he was with the Giants. Now, there's all kinds of potential differences. Like, we keep hearing that there's motivation by Correa's side to work out a deal with the Mets. And that's something we never really got the sense of with the San Francisco Giants. So it's possible that there is a preference there for him on his side to work something out with the Mets, but it's also possible we're just not getting the full story. In fact, we're definitely not getting the full story. So coming up in just a minute, where do things stand? What is going on and what is going to happen with Carlos Correa moving forward? We'll get into it in just a minute, but before we do, this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your #1 source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends, for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball. All kinds of action you can check out. Most of the off-season, MLB off-season stuff is over, although if you have a outstanding bet on Carlos Correa, the fact that these deals aren't finalized with the Giants and then with the Mets, and my goodness, who knows at this point what is going to transpire. But it's been a lot of fun to look at these bet online odds all off-season long. Pretty soon here we'll have over-unders on Giants win totals that we'll get into, and much more. So you can check it out for yourself. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet online, where the game starts. All right, as promised, more about Carlos Correa. This situation, to me, like, it largely does let the Giants off the hook. And it just goes to show you that instant reactions that are so emotional tend to be kind of flawed. And I don't know. We said, if you've been listening to this show every day, we said all along the most likely situation here was that the Giants actually just found a very problematic result when they did their physical that was unexpected to them. And that seems to be what happens, because it's happened with the Mets as well. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today, the biggest stories around the sports world in 20 minutes or less, plus instant reactions, game recaps, and Locked On's Take of the Day. Locked On Sports Today, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. So where do things stand now, and what is likely to happen at this point? As I was just saying, Correa is very likely effectively a free agent again. The deal with the Mets is likely dead, the original deal. That doesn't mean he can't work out something else. But once they get into the point where they're discussing working out something else, he's a free agent, and other teams, including the Giants, can be involved in those discussions. There's no longer exclusive negotiation rights. The Mets never had exclusive negotiating rights. What they had was an agreement for 12 years, $315 million. And if the physical gave the Mets reason to, basically Correa was obligated to those terms. If the Mets had been satisfied with the physical, it was a done deal. All they had to do was say, yes, we will honor these terms that we agreed to that were pending a physical, and it's a done deal. They said they had expected that to be done before Christmas. Obviously, just the fact that it isn't done yet, and the fact that reports, Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic and others have reported that the Mets had an issue with the physical. And so it's the same exact situation. Scott Boras will say, are you going to honor this letter of agreement? Giants had 1 day or less to make their call on this. And the Mets, we don't know how much time he gave them because it hasn't come out yet. But there's no way he's giving them 5 days to decide simply, are you going to honor 12/3/15? Are you going to honor this original agreement? That doesn't take 5 days of thinking. You either honor it or you don't. And to me, it's clear and all but certain that the Mets have said, we're not going to honor this agreement. And as soon as they say that, he is effectively a free agent. And so there could be, because the reporting, it's been one-sided, right? It's these New York-based reporters like John Heyman basically saying the New York Post is getting a lot of info on this, but they're tied up with the Mets, and Steve Cohen is buddy with John Heyman from everything I've kind of read coming out of there. And so we're not getting the full story, but if they won't honor the original letter of agreement, then he's effectively a free agent again. And the Giants and the Mets are the two teams that have the benefit of having the full physicals done. What we simply don't know, all of this could be moot as it pertains to the Giants' perspective in all this. If you're holding out hope that Correa ends up back with the Giants, they might not even want him. If they truly didn't say anything else to Boras after they said they won't honor their letter of agreement at about 1 p.m. last Tuesday, maybe it was just look, we could make him a 3-year offer, but there's just no way that he's going to be interested in that at this point. And so we're just going to hold back. We don't know any specifics about any of that, but the Giants do have the benefit of a week passing post-physical, doing a thorough physical. Like they said last week, we need more time. They've had more time. And so they very well could have figured out what a good offer would be, and that they're involved in these conversations and trying to get a deal done. Because before, it seemed impossible to imagine him going back to the Giants if there was a disagreement about the physical. But at this point, the cat's out of the bag. There doesn't seem to be disagreement. Correa is seemingly damaged goods to some extent. We don't know if, like, we've heard reporting that basically they expect the issue is the long-term stability of the leg. We haven't heard that it's something that necessarily right now is a problem, but it's something that when you're talking about a 12-year or a 13-year deal, it certainly gives them pause. And so you could have you could have a contract that changes from the total years and total guaranteed money. You could have a contract that is the same kind of terms but has some built-in language that protects the team in the event of some sort of issue with the ankle long term. And so we simply don't know, and it's impossible to know what a reasonable offer would be without knowing exactly what the physical has turned up. But the fact that it's no longer a difference of opinion, as Farhan Zaidi said in that short 2 or 3 sentence press release after Correa had agreed to a deal pending a physical with the Mets, it's not the case anymore. It's not a difference of opinion. Everybody knows. And any other team that enters the fray here, there's just no way to me at this point that there's some team that's going to sign him to a deal, to a deal similar to what the Mets and Giants were offering there, and end up having him clear a physical. Like, right? Something is wrong with the leg. And I just want to get back to the point about the Giants, in my mind, didn't really do anything wrong here. The actors who come out looking bad or the worst in this, the Giants are at the bottom of the list. Like, they look the best out of the 3 actors in this story. There's the Correa and Boras camp, there's the New York Mets, and there's the San Francisco Giants. And of the 3, I think the Giants come out actually looking the best here. The big mistake, in my opinion, that they made was having this press conference the next day after the physical, and a week after they had agreed to terms. Why not just get him in there quickly and don't report, that the date of the press conference and have his family in town and all that. But at the same time, like I alluded to earlier, Boras and Correa should know very well and in a lot of detail the exact status of the player's health. And so it's possible that they knew it and they were just hoping that the team would look past it. Or if they didn't know it, then that's a bad job by Scott Boras, because you have to know the status of the health of the player that you're representing. And so they don't look so good. And then the fact that the Giants said, we need more time, there's a problem. And instead of acknowledging it, they sought out an owner who they thought was willing to maybe look past it even more. They sought out an owner who they seemingly deemed to be the most likely to look past some sort of possibly future issue with his leg. But and then the Mets don't look great here either, because Steve Cohen, he knew that the Giants had flagged an issue, and yet he went out and made this deal anyway, and even commented on the deal, which you're not supposed to do. He said things to, again, the New York Post and John Heyman about this pending deal with Carlos Correa before it was official. So he kind of made the assumption that the physical was going to go through. But again, this could be Boras's doing, saying that the Giants, they're not actually finding a real issue. They're just getting cold feet. We don't know exactly what they said, but it's just odd that the Mets pushed this through and assumed that the physical would be fine. And then I think the worst, the actors who come out looking the worst here are Scott Boras, and I want to say and Correa, but really it's on Scott Boras, who represents the player. So when all is said and done, maybe the Giants are just feeling the same way, that they got not played, but that Scott Boras and Carlos Correa's camp acted kind of shady in that they basically were hiding an injury. I don't know. I'm not accusing them of that, but what I am saying is they either needed to know about this, they either knew about it and didn't disclose it, or if they didn't know about it, then that's just not good representing by Scott Boras. So coming up in just a minute, we're going to wrap up our thoughts on this whole conversation and talk about the chances that the Giants could actually end up again with Carlos Correa, and if that's realistic at all. So we'll get into that in just a second. But first, all right, as promised, wrapping up my thoughts on Carlos Correa. It's just that, like, we don't know the status of the leg. So unfortunately, we cannot determine with any kind of certainty if the Giants are even interested. And the range of, if they are interested, the one thing I'll take away from those earlier comments that we read is that the Giants, Boras said that the Giants told him they wanted to continue to talk, but at that time they couldn't go forward. What they couldn't go forward with was 13 years, $350 million. Now, that makes a lot of sense. It seems like the Giants were very correct in not doing that because the Mets and their more aggressive owner are balking at a deal that's $35 million cheaper. And I've had people ask me, would Correa even want to go back to the Giants after the way that the Giants handled things? How did they handle things? What did they do that was so wrong? The Mets have done the exact same thing with a lesser offer. And someone else pointed out, and I completely agree, that it's possible that if all else is equal, like if Correa's injury or status of his leg is a known commodity, it's a known fact about Carlos Correa, if it's just established that he has some kind of issue with his ankle that teams have some kind of concern about and that concern is agreed to, there's a consensus about what that issue is going to cause for him down the road or in the present, whatever. If the playing field is level, it's possible that the Giants once again are the most motivated team here and once again make the best offer because that's how they got him in the first place. They made the best offer assuming he was fully healthy. Now, if it's well established that he's not fully healthy and there's some kind of issue that teams agree upon, they agree about the nature of this leg issue, it's possible that the Giants once again are the team willing to make the best offer given the circumstances. And so for that reason, I certainly wouldn't rule out the possibility that the Giants do end up with Correa. But as I have said a bunch of times here, we just don't know. Maybe it's just a non-starter for them, the issue with this leg. But I wouldn't think that Correa himself would have some kind of issue going back to the Giants. If anything, the way that he and Scott Boras handled it by quickly jumping ship and pivoting to another team makes them look bad, and it's possible that the Giants are the ones who are offended by the way this whole thing went down, with the agent basically trying to rush them to make a decision about taking on a player that they probably knew had some kind of issue with his leg. So the whole situation is very messy, but the fact that we're entering day 5 post-physical with the Mets tells me Correa is back on the open market. And if Correa is back on the open market, there's no reason the Giants couldn't be the most motivated team here. We have heard reporting that on Correa's side, there's a desire to get something done with the Mets. Now, if that's the case, there's nothing the Giants can do about that. That would be the case all along. But keep in mind, the Mets offer was $35 million short of the Giants offer. And so, again, if the Mets have the same concerns, why couldn't the Giants be the team that ends up making the best offer again? So all of this reporting coming out of the New York Post pretty much exclusively is going to be kind of Mets-centric. And the Giants front office just doesn't leak information. And so they could be very involved in these conversations, and we likely just wouldn't know about it. Remember, when they signed him in the first place, there wasn't any buildup. It was just Jeff Passan dropping a Passan bomb on Twitter saying the Giants and Carlos Correa are in agreement on a 13-year, $350 million deal pending a physical. But I don't know. It's hard for me to say. Also in, by the way, the New York Post last night, a report, kind of an update on the situation. One source told the Post that the odds of the Mets working something out with Correa were 55%. So I'll shave off 5% there because it's a New York-centric kind of frame of mind. And essentially what they're saying is it's a coin flip. Whether or not he goes to the Mets or somewhere else at this point, And that extra 5% is just homerism. And I mean, I would have the same thing if the Giants were in this same situation. If I thought it was 50-50, I might call it 55% because, you just have those inherent biases. So anyway, the whole situation is insane. But the Giants, like at this point, it's really not that legit to hold them to the fire on this. Like clearly there was they knew they were going to get destroyed for backing out of this deal, but they did it anyway because they trusted the opinions of their doctors, and they've been vindicated. Like the fact that this has happened with the Mets, who are a far more kind of careless but far more risk-taking organization right now, tells you that the Giants were 100% right to do what they did. And the fact that they were in communication with Scott Boras, they didn't just ghost him. They simply said, we can't honor 13,350, but we'd like to continue to talk. And instead of acknowledging there was an issue with the leg and working with the Giants, Scott Boras took the stance that there's nothing wrong with him, and I'm going to seek out other teams who are going to have the opinion that there's nothing wrong with him. But it turns out you can't fool these doctors. There's something wrong with him. So how it all ends, I have no idea, but the Giants are still in play if they want to be. If they don't want to be, then they don't want to be, and we might not ever find that out. But if they still want this player, but at just different terms because of the leg issue, they're going to have their shot, because there's no way that Boras is only negotiating with the Mets at this point. That's one more thing I wanted to point out. There's no reason for Scott Boras to have blocked out other teams. If he's willing to renegotiate terms with the Mets, why not involve other teams and see if you might get something better elsewhere? Could be that Correa's preference is to go to New York, but you might as well at least get the other teams involved once the Mets have said they won't honor the 12-315 agreement based on the failed physical. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. Peter Bukowski brings you the biggest stories from around the sports world in 20 minutes. Get the analysis and opinions before anyone else with our local and national experts and insiders. Locked On Sports Today podcast available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. Helps me out a lot. So thanks in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. Can't wait to be with you again 2 more times this week. So thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.